Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It is Dr. Fresh Hour here with another video today. I have the lawn people here and the dogs are upstairs, so if you hear anything, I apologize. But I want to give you guys a cool video because I was listening to a podcast and it got my brain thinking about refeeding and metabolism. And I just pulled up a couple things that I want to hit on today. So before we get going, as always, startfreshmd.com is my website. I post articles, my videos like the one you're watching are on here. My two plans, basically $60 a month or $100 a month, dictate talking weekly or bi-weekly. And the 30 minutes is closer to an hour these days. The donation button does work. So let's jump back into this. Let's jump into this. And to start our video, I want to talk about this point from one study that showed that declines in energy expenditure favoring the regain of lost weight persist well beyond the period of dynamic weight loss. So what does this mean and why is this important? So let's say this. The declines in energy expenditure favoring the regain of lost weight. So whenever you lose weight, there is a decline in your body's energy expenditure. And that extends well beyond your diet or whenever you're trying to lose weight. So let's say this, 6 months, you lose a lot of weight. Your body's going to have a natural decrease in energy expenditure. So whenever you go off of your diet and start eating remotely like you used to, you throw all of that weight right back on again. And that extends well beyond the period of dynamic weight loss. So what can we do to prevent this decline in energy expenditure that we all experience? One way that we do that is with refeeding. And refeeding is, every few weeks, just drastically or statistically significant a level, increasing your caloric intake. So bodybuilders do it with carbs. I recommend doing it with protein and fat. But essentially what we're trying to counter is this adaptive thermogenesis, which would be what this decline in energy expenditure that we just talked about is. So it's a protective process. It alters your body's metabolism to increase energy intake and decrease energy output to slow weight loss. So increase energy intake, you're getting hungrier. You decrease your energy output, so your basal metabolic rate, and another thing that we'll talk about in a little bit, that all decreases. And they talk about the hormones involved, and they go into how to use refeeding days. But essentially, I just want you to know that your body will actually burn less calories as you lose weight, unless you do things like refeed every now and then, or drastically increase your protein intake. So this is an article about being in ketosis, being ketogenic, flipping the metabolic switch, as they like to call it. But in reality, it's just reducing your blood sugar or reducing your carbs or sugar intake low enough that your body is now using ketones, which is how you use fat as energy. So this is a cool little diagram. You can pause the video right now and read about it, but there's a few points that I want to talk about in this video. So when you reduce your carbohydrate and sugar intake, you're going to have a reduced glucose and insulin and leptin, which is how hungry you are. So you're less hungry, your glucose and your insulin are down, and your insulin sensitivity is going to increase. You're essentially reversing your diabetes. You have reduced inflammatory cytokines, so you have reduced inflammation in your gut and your muscles. And your adipose tissue, you have lipolysis, so lipid cutting, which is how you mobilize the fat. Reduced inflammation as well. Wow, that's great, because inflammation in your fat actually causes it to want to store more. If you want to dig into that a little bit, look into high fructose corn syrup and the byproduct of it being uric acid, and what uric acid does to adipose tissue, if you really want to do that. Reduce blood pressure, reduce resting heart rate, and increase parasympathetic tone and stress resistance. There's so much right there that's very big. And the other thing that I think is silly, I want to hit this for a few seconds, improve cognition. So it makes sense as a species that we would be cognitively at our best when we haven't had food, because we would need to cognitively be at our best to then get food and retrieve food. We were hunters. So everyone who always thinks, you got to have breakfast, most important meal of the day for cognitive function, they're full of crap. That's not how it works. And physiologically, it makes no sense. So the fact that physicians and nutritionists have been fighting this for so long, breakfast is horrible for your brain. Like, the reason why some people feel better after breakfast is because they've had breakfast for so long. It just doesn't make any sense why you would think better after you eat food when everything that promotes alertness, focus, your muscles and everything getting so ready for action, that's all sympathetic. And so being in a state of parasympathetic. I know this says increased parasympathetic tone. That's for your heart. When I'm talking about, your eyes, your brain, your body, your muscles, it just makes sense as hunter-gatherers when we haven't had food, our body, if it's going to survive, which we have for tens of thousands of years, to be better without food because we need to get it. So breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. And when you're when you're in ketosis or you're intermittent fasting, you haven't had breakfast, which is how you maintain ketosis. Most of the time involves fasting or just zero carb intake or very minimal. Your brain works better. It does, and you think better. So if you don't, then it takes a little while, 7 to 10 days to get into that state. But that one really, obviously, huge soapbox. So, okay. Here's something that I wanted to talk about, and this kind of is like your TDEE, which is your components of total daily energy expenditure. I kind of want to talk about that, but one thing that I want to talk about, so they kind of talk about bodybuilders here a little bit, and it says previous research has indicated that structured resistance training and sufficient protein intake, bodybuilders and contest preparation, it preserves lean body mass during energy restriction. Now these guys are on a lot of anabolic hormones, but this is even true in natural bodybuilders. So are dependent on the magnitude of weight loss degree and adiposity. Let's see. That's not really that important. What I wanted you to take away from this was that resistance training and protein intake are a great way to preserve lean body mass or muscle while you're losing fat, and these guys lose more fat and get to a lower percentage than anybody else, right? So next up, let's see. Okay, here's another study that I want you to take away this point from it. Let's see. In contrast to the near equivalency of dietary carbs and fat, protein, so in contrast to carb and fat, protein is known to positively influence body composition during weight loss and has a small, has a small positive effect on resting metabolism. And diets with higher protein may also offer benefits for maintaining weight loss. Crazy, right? And it goes more into this, but that's kind of what I wanted you to take away from this. So here's one study. Findings that alternate day fasting may have greater reductions in fasting insulin and insulin resistance, reversing type 2 diabetes. Let's see, so basically this is comparing caloric restriction to fasting and showing that, similar decreases in body weight, but people who used fasting are actually reversing their type 2 diabetes better because that's what they are. So even if they didn't say type 2 diabetes, improving your insulin sensitivity is reversing type 2 diabetes. So the results of this other study shows that this is incremental or whatever, intermittent caloric restriction, so fasting versus a continuous caloric restriction, which is just regular diets like Weight Watchers and stuff. So for reducing your triglyceride levels, let's see here, it appears to be more effective than continuous dieting and improving insulin resistance. So this is showing that fasting is better for improving your insulin resistance. There's another study, and there's like hundreds and hundreds of these studies that just show, or maybe not hundreds, but every single study will show you that any form of fasting with weight loss is going to improve your insulin resistance, your insulin sensitivity, and reduce your insulin resistance. It's going to help reverse your diabetes. And the last point I want to make is not really related to anything we've talked about, but I like to make this point. They talk about the power of protein. We've talked about the power of protein, but power, not just strength. So building muscle is not all about strength. You also need power. Muscle power is how fast and efficient you move. It's more connected to the activities of daily living and physical function. So being strong is great. But okay, a good way to improve overall muscle power is with your legs, since they are the most responsible for mobility. Doing quicker movements against resistance, like one's own body weight, can be an effective means of developing power. So the difference in this would be, I'm sure you can find a fit 60-year-old man or woman who could squat a lot of weight. There's a lot of old guys that are old power lifters and women who can squat a ton. But if you give them a 4-foot gap and you say, hey, you have to jump over this, or whatever, insert something that makes them motivated for $10 million. A lot of them can't do it. And that's power. That is what I'm talking about. Power is extremely important. As we age, it becomes more important. Another example would be, I'm sure you can find a fit old guy who can walk or jog or do the elliptical or maybe even use some weights, but they can't jump over a puddle. And that is the importance of power. So anyway, just a random side note that I stumbled upon. But thanks for sticking with me despite the noise. I'm not sure how much of it's coming through. But I'm Dr. Fresh Hour with another video, Fresh Start Initiative. Have a great day, everybody.